Finally there. Hi everyone. Yeah, as I've already been introduced, my name's Jamie. I work at Raygun. We're a reasonably small company down in Wellington. It's about 18 of us, 20 of us maybe in Wellington. So I'm a senior dev there. I've been working there about, I want to say about a year and a bit. So I work on basically everything. So yeah, a bunch of the DevOps stuff that Peter was talking about. This kind of idea of full stack developers should pretty much be touching everything. Yeah, sort of thought I'd give a talk about the sort of stuff I do at Raygun. So we use Raygun internally on Raygun. So there's we've got this sort of, I guess, my workflow. But one of the things I wanted to cover off was like my bio or whatever in the meetup description talked about the ostriches thing, which didn't really make sense unless you read my intro blog post when I first joined Raygun. So my wife and I I want to say about 4 years ago, did this trip around South Africa with my in-laws from South Africa. We were in this tiny little town called George, heading down to Cape Town from there. And as we were going to leave, the guy we were staying with says, by the way, the road between here and Cape Town's closed because of a slip. But there's a back road you can take. So you just got to follow this thing, go through this farm, it's all fine. We get to this, out into the middle of nowhere. I don't know if you've been to South Africa, but you get up into the Karoo and there's a sort of farmy, deserty sort of area. So it's a really, really beautiful part of the country. But we were basically in the backwoods of nowhere and kind of took a wrong turn somewhere along the lines and ran into an ostrich farmer, herding ostriches like you would herd cattle. So I took this picture just before they started attacking the car. Ostriches get really mad. I didn't know that was a thing, but they start sort of pecking at the car. I got this nice shot of this one. Kind of off topic-ish, but that was kind of how I felt about deploying when I first joined Raygun. It felt very much like this sort of ad hoc, crazy, anybody does everything, we're kind of off the grid, I don't know what's going on sort of process. One of the ways essentially we can, you can deal with that craziness, and what I didn't realize at the time was we monitor everything. So yeah, Peter sort of covered off on a bunch of the stuff that they do. That's basically the only way that I can stay sane with the amount of times that we push out code to basically every system that we have. So I thought this quote from Donald Rumsfeld, of all people, was kind of interesting. But so reports say that something hasn't happened are always interesting to me because, as we know, there are known knowns. There are things that we know. There are also we also know that there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are things that we do not know. However, there are also unknown unknowns, the ones we don't know, and that was kind of where where I felt we would have been without Raygun. I do a lot of customer support, and one of the things that comes through a lot is that people talk about is this idea of, I didn't realize how badly we were failing. So if you don't have those tools and monitoring things like crashes or average time to first byte for your users, or that sort of stuff, it's really overwhelming when you install the tools and start looking at the metrics and go, oh, we didn't really know any of this stuff. One of the things we try and do at Raygun, and this is kind of part of, I guess, my daily process, is we try and keep on top of those. So it's not a case of, oh wow, I guess we didn't know that at 2 p.m. our billing processor fails to charge cards in the States or whatever. We've got this sort of continuous process of monitoring everything that goes wrong. So basically, I get in the morning. I read the daily digest. There's we send out an email. We can send out an email every day that sort of just tells you, the state of the world, how many errors were there, what applications were there, and like that sort of stuff. So I sort of browsed through that just to see how bad yesterday was. Then given that knowledge, I can check the support queue, and a lot of times they'll have, people, who've sort of passed the ticket in and gone, hey, like this is broken. I'm like, that's cool, because I've already seen that error. So, I start picking up these, making these little links. So we've got a bunch of notification systems. We've got a bunch of notifications that feed into either like Slack or email. So I've got a notifications folder in my email, but also there's a couple of rooms similar to what you guys have got, but just based on environment. So we've got one that's like all of our, sort of critical production errors that have come in. So it's just kind of a case of just like, check the support queue, like write some emails, recheck the notifications, check the support queue, read the notifications, check the support queue. And it just keeps going like that until I die and go home. So the Daily Digest is kind of like a key part of that. Yes, that did support that. That did go for it, right. It's kind of it's a good little overview. Like it's really easy to get lost in like our Slack room has a lot of stuff in it, and sometimes I kind of wonder if it wouldn't be better if we could just chop down some of the spam essentially. Like you can see like there's a couple of JavaScript errors that that keep coming back that I think are from people installing having like extensions or something. Screwing with things where I'm just like, that stuff's important, but like I don't need to know that it's constantly reoccurring, right? But if I look at something like the Daily Digest, I can see, actually the JS one, yeah, that is kind of the, the problem child, but otherwise everything else is not too bad. But yeah, it's kind of like being able to see how things, how bad things are, and then looking at the support queue and going, yeah, that basically matches my, my expectation is good. Like it's, less surprises. So support's kind of a big thing at Raygun. It's one of the things that people rave about is that, you send an email and someone usually within an hour or two will try and email you back. Like if you're having an issue, like we try and our we're developers. All the developers do all the support. Our customers are developers. It's really, people seem to like it because we basically sort of treat them as if we're just telling another person in the team stuff. It's a great way to get customers for life. They seem really surprised when when they get like a real human on the other end, and on top of that it's someone who knows what's going on and has already seen their problem come through and can say, actually, we've already got someone working on that, and and here's some stuff that you can do to mitigate that or whatever. If you've already got that information and you can quickly spit it back to them, that's huge for a lot of people. It's a lot of guys working in big companies who expect this stuff to go into a ticket queue and disappear into a black hole for for a couple of weeks. So that's sort of one of the things we try and sort of get on top of. So yeah, part of that is the notifications. So we get these these Slack messages whenever a new error report comes in. So those usually get jumped on. Like if it's during work hours, one of the devs will be like a couple of people will be, sort of actively monitoring that room, and and we'll try and triage these things. So this one's a kind of interesting one. So that link, I guess after the error was huge thing, that takes you to like an error details page, so you can pick out things like, say, who the user was, and like what URL they were hitting and stuff like that. Like so, there's kind of a summary view and then a few extra tabs of other information. So one of the kind of useful things is like for me anyway, is the raw request data. So being able to see exactly what they posted in, because that's I don't know if you can read the tiny notification, but it's like it's a validation exception of some kind, and I'm like, I don't understand how oh right, yeah. It's the guy that spams all our forms with stuff about safe harbor worshippers. I don't know. It's like some kind of some kind of bot guy. So Speaking of tinfoil hat, so part of that process is user tracking, but not in a creepy way. So, so one of the things that you can do with your when you set up Raygun is attach like a what is it? So you can attach like a sort of a system identifier of some kind. So that's something that's unique to your system. You can. And then, like, basically everything else from there is optional. The whole feature is optional, but if you are sending anything at all, you've got to send the identifier. You can add, like, a full name, an email, I think, like, a machine unique ID, if it's, like, a mobile app or whatever. Can't remember anything else off the top of my head. So that's kind of, you get this sort of... For a particular error, you can click through and see, oh, look, here's the list of users that that have experienced this error, and how many times have they seen it, and like a sort of quick link, like off to sort of contact them via email if you've sent the email or something along those lines. But it's quite good to be able to see, oh, actually this error is kind of critical. Like we've had 10, 20 people hit it in the last hour. Like that's a lot of separate people. That's sort of that bumps it up the priority queue a bit. So we've got a guy that's not a bot, my workmate Alex. So one of the things that we can do is, given the email, there's a service called Full Contact, which you feed it an email and it spits back like basically any publicly accessible information it can find on that email address. So you can get things like Twitter account, Facebook, LinkedIn. I think it guesses at their name if it has it. But that's kind of, that's useful for us anyway, because quite often we'll have people hit like as many support queues as they can find. So they'll fire off tweets, they'll send emails, they'll hit the feedback link in the app. They're just like firing stuff off. And so you have a lot of separate people that are like, hey, like this guy is having issues. But if you can say, oh, actually, it's plain sight on Twitter and like this guy in the app, and you can start sort of tying those things together. Because one of the things that we found was we have so many support queues, like four different ways for people to kind of contact us, that it just it became a chore to try and tie all those together, and keep track of who was dealing with a customer. So being able to sort of pull together that sort of information is pretty handy. So yeah, like I said, it's all opt-in. So if you've got issues with like personally identifiable information, I always forget that acronym, then you just don't send it. It's pretty easy. It kind of freaked me out when I first looked at it, because I was like, holy God, how does it know who I am or whatever? But then I kind of realized, oh, actually, I put a bunch of this stuff on Twitter. So yeah, we have like a whole bunch of integrations. I've already mentioned Slack. I love Slack. Slack is probably the biggest like help to being able to do this sort of like quick turnaround support and bug fixing cycle. So yeah, similar to PushPay, we've got these we've got all these different rooms. One of the things that one of the sort of important rooms is when a Raygun error comes in and nobody's seen it, like it's really important to be able to go, oh, you know what, nobody seems to be dealing with this. So I'd quite often I'm sort of keeping track of it, and I'll say, hey, oi, Alex, look at this, or like someone needs to figure this thing out. But on top of that, like if someone comes in later, like that's all in Slack. That there's sort of a, I guess like a can't think of a good word for it, but like there's that sort of continuity that someone else, if they come in later, is not going to go, oh, where's this up to? Like it's all in Slack. The original notification from Raygun, all of the conversation around it, everything goes through Slack, and it's amazing. So we integrate with heaps of other stuff. So most of it falls into sort of either chat programs like Slack, HipChat, that sort of stuff, or issue trackers. So one of the nice things you can do is say, you've got a Raygun error, it's a new one. Most people aren't using Raygun as a, as an issue tracker. So you'd, it's like, hey, create an issue in Jira, or alternatively link to an existing issue in Jira, because we've already seen this before. And then at that point, every time you go back to the error, you're like, oh, actually, you know what, this is in Jira and someone is already handling it. That's great. So we've got a few other ones coming up, but it's kind of one of those things we just keep tacking on new integrations as needed. But yeah, that sort of stands out for people as a really cool thing. Just being able to integrate Raygun with a bunch of your existing stack, right? Like we're not sort of saying, oh, you have to use Raygun and Raygun issue tracking and whatever. It's this idea of best of breed software, right? Like use us and use whoever else you want as well. So I got a real quick demo. I don't know how many JavaScript people are in the house, but I'll just make sure this is still running. But basically I just got a little Node app because I'm lazy, and that was the easiest way to set it up. That just fires off some errors. So my wonderful app does nothing except fail, which is great. Come on. There we go. Yes. Okay, so I have succeeded to fail. That's exactly right. So there's really not a lot going on in this thing. So I've got a really basic Express.js app that does nothing except fail, which is definitely what you want out of your apps. So the JavaScript client, the JavaScript setup is kind of vaguely similar to the other ones in that you basically create a client, attach it to the currently running app, and then it just kind of catches any unhandled exceptions at the top level. So we kind of, one of the big things for my boss is making everything as as easy as humanly possible. We kind of want to dummy proof it, even though devs are smart people. But it's so the idea is that out of the box you want to just catch anything that the user hasn't, any exception or error that the user hasn't handled themselves. So just got a basic sort of initialize thing. You pass it an API key. Everything in Raygun's just based around they're just you're sort of posting a piece of JSON describing the error at an API endpoint. So the great thing is we've got these client libraries, but you don't have to use them if you don't want to, or if you've got some kind of brand new language that nobody knows about. So in Express.js, you just add basically the last piece of middleware in the pipeline. You just go, hey, if there was an error, then do something with it. So in this case, we're sending it to Raygun. I've added a little bit of extra stuff in here, like some custom data, but I'll talk about that in a second. But that's kind of that's the key piece of the puzzle. So if we jump to not my demo backup, oh come on, you know what? Maybe I'd take that out of. I'm so bad at demos. Okay, it really doesn't help that Windows has decided that I'm multi-touching every. Let's just not talk about that. Come on, you can do it. Yes. Just have to touch carefully. So, in theory, we should have got some arrows through. Yes. Okay. So we've got two errors because one of them's being sent from the back end, and then I decided to do one on the front end as well, just to show both sides of it, I guess. So this one is the main one that we just saw. So we grabbed kind of as much detail about the error as we can. So this is where I was talking about. We've got the summary view and then other stuff. So for me, the kind of important stuff is, what type of error was it? What was the message? We've got these tags that you can attach. Stack trace is great, right? There's still stuff that you expect to see when you're debugging, but having it stored somewhere else is so you can look at it later on is really good. So we've got the affected user stuff. I set up myself in there because why not? So it shows the host name of the machine that sent it. That's quite handy if you've got multiple servers and one of them is misbehaving, but not all of them are. So all of this stuff is, is like sort of summarizing things that are on these other tabs. What other cool stuff is there? If I had sent like query string parameters or like form variables or that sort of stuff, we try and capture as much of that as we can. We grab all the headers. That's often quite handy. And then then we've got this custom idea, right? So one of the things that comes up is, at least within our team, is like people kind of not really, like sort of de facto own little pieces of the app. So at least within like say a single code base, so like say our application, there might be other bits that say like so at the moment I'm working on the billing stuff. Being able to tag some of the errors as coming from the billing system, so I can quickly go, hey, like how bad is the billing system? Chuck a filter in, go, oh, okay, so it's had like 2 errors over the last couple of days. That's not so bad. But like stuff like that. It's just like it's sort of extra data that you can attach, so you can filter, sort of search and filter on it later. So we've got that affected users stuff. We have like a nice little graph that shows you, how many errors you've seen recently. The browsers, that's often quite handy, being able to search by, say, how many of these errors have happened for Internet Explorer users. Kind of handy for JS errors. So there was, so the client side part of it, where are you? What's that in here? Yeah, same sort of thing, except I don't have to do very much work at all with the JavaScript stuff, because we just attach to window.on error, which is way easier. So the thing about this sort of user tracking stuff is you can do it based on, if it's on the server side anyway, you can do it based on the request. So you can pull like user IDs or whatever out of your session if that's where you store them. I don't know. But there's really just not a lot to show. It's kind of a boring demo in a certain sense, because it's just like, oh look, there's some code. But we've got packages for pretty much every major language that I can think of. I don't know if we have a Haskell one, but like there's actually no, wait, someone wrote one. Yeah, so that's the other thing, is that a bunch of our libraries, like all of our libraries, are open source. So anyone's free to look at the code and contribute if you like. That's always awesome. I love it when people send me patches. But a bunch of the stuff just gets written by community members, so that's always nice. So jumping back to that guy. So I figure out why it thinks I'm doing multi-touch. So the front end ones, like there's not really too much difference, except obviously I'm like just sort of throwing this error from like a script tag in the page, so there's not really much in the way of stack traces, but it's basically the same sort of data. Source maps would be handy if I'd set them up. But like it's basically the same regardless of what language you're dealing with. We don't really have any special sort of, like even though we're a .NET shop, it's not really like .NET is the blessed integration. Anything will do as long as it has errors and stack traces and that sort of stuff. So yeah, one of the things I should have actually talked about if I'd thought about it more carefully was the deployment tracking. So I don't have anything set up, but basically you can send in, like if you do like roll out your the latest version of your code, you can send us a webhook to say, hey, I've deployed the latest version of my code. Here's the version number. Here's the Git hash. If you're using our GitHub integration, we can do nice things like, here's the last deployment. Here's the current deployment. We can fetch the GitHub like a diff for those two things, and then go, hey, like your last deployment had these errors in it, and here's the code that changed. So one of the things I want to do from that is start looking at like, here's the code that changed. These errors had stack traces which match up to this code. Like you can start doing those kind of cool things. Like we're talking about these like blameless postmortems. Like JD always kind of worries that it will just end up being like one of those sort of blame features. Shame. Ding, ding, ding. Yeah. So. But yeah, so we haven't really got there with that, but it's one of the things I'm kind of like, once you start getting all this data, you can start doing cool things with it like that. So let's jump back to this guy. So I guess like it probably makes sense to talk a little bit about how like Raygun itself is set up, because one of the nice things is, you know, like I said at the start, you know, like people we're deploying sort of just whenever stuff is ready. There's no sort of wait for, you know, like this process to finish, or, you know, like whatever. It's just kind of like, oh, the feature is done, you know, like the code has been tested and reviewed, out it goes. So one of the key things about that is being able to bring down a piece of the app, a piece of the infrastructure at any point. So there's kind of only a couple of key pieces in here that really can't stop like 100%. So obviously the API, because that's where everybody sends their error events. But the thing is, that's like a really small thing. So we've just got there's an elastic load balancer, because this is all on AWS. People send post their errors at us. That hits the API, and the API does nothing except go, okay, this is you know, like this has this API key. They've still got a valid plan. You know, they haven't gone over their usage for the month. Sweet, chuck it in the queue. And so if you have a look on this thing, like all the dotted lines are basically queues. I'll try not to sort of make hard links on between pieces of infrastructure if we can avoid it, because the idea is, you know, like we can just take down the main worker for a while. Errors will queue up for a bit. All that happens is people's errors don't show up immediately in the app, because I mean usually it's sort of 10 to 20 seconds at most, I think, if we're really being really under the gun. So yeah, so the API queues up stuff for the main worker, which is the bit that goes, hey, this error is grouped up with these other errors. You know, like it has the same stack trace and the same type, so it's probably the same thing. Rather than, and we sort of do different things based on different languages, just because you kind of get less information from JavaScript in general than, say, something like C# or Java. But we've kind of got a bit of a process around going, these errors are roughly the same. We're pretty sure that those should go together. You know, so instead of going, hey, an error occurred, we can go, hey, an error occurred, and it's still happening 2 minutes later, and you've seen 100 of these so far, and the rate is decreasing. You're like, you've had a lot, and now you don't have quite so many. That's a good thing. You know, we can start doing a little bit, we can be a bit more intelligent around the notifications. But basically all that main worker is doing is just sort of going, okay, error, group it, chuck up a new error group in the database if we need to, but otherwise, no, just pop it in a queue for the other things. So it queues up some stuff to pop it into Elasticsearch, so we get all the search indexing and stuff like that. There's another bit that queues it up to store the raw error data in S3. So unlike some of our competitors, we actually store everything. So all of the errors that you send us, we don't sample them or anything. We just go error data S3, and that just stays there until the error's out of, you know, expired or whatever. There's a sort of plan level expiry on that. There's another one that goes, hey, an error event, and fires off something else in the queue for the notification worker. So the notification worker can go, oh, an error happened. Yep, that's a new error. Fire off an email, or, you know, like put something in Slack. So it's kind of, all these little bits are kind of, you know, essentially decoupled from the main process. So there was a Amazon, like AWS outage a couple of days ago. I don't know if you guys noticed. Half the internet stopped working. That only impacted one piece of our infrastructure, and that was the error details view. So that when we go to store all the data in S3, the only piece of the app that pulls from that is that error instance view. So we can still tell someone, hey, a new error happened, and, you know, like there's this number of them, but we can't give you the details of this exact one because S3 is down, which is a pretty unlikely thing. But, you know, like it's still that idea of like sort of trying to pull things apart. So it's not like, oh, S3 is down, the app doesn't work. But I think the only key things that need to be up is obviously the database and the app and the API. And everything else is kind of, yeah, you know, we can kind of work in a limited mode if it doesn't work. So yeah, there's that idea of don't couple everything together if you can avoid it. But that means that we can just go, just roll out some updates to the main worker, and it doesn't work. Roll it back, and then everything is queued back up. We'll just push it back through again. It's kind of it feels really scary at the start, but it's really freeing in the long term because I don't actually have to worry about like my junior developers doing deployments. Like when someone deploys something in Octopus, it pushes a notification into Slack. Just goes, Jamie pushed the app to production. Cool, that's good. Like that's all the notification I need. I don't need someone to come up to me and go, hey, is it okay if I use the beta environment, or like is it okay if I push my code to production today? It's just like, no, you can do it. You own the failures. The notifications for things happening are all public, so everybody has access to the ops channel, where all the deployments and stuff happen. They all have access to the error channel where like things are, all of the horrible notifications are coming in. So yeah, there's that idea of you trust your your coworkers to do their job essentially. It's really nice. So yeah, we use Raygun in all parts of Raygun. So yeah, there's like 80 apps set up in Raygun, which is a lot, but not the most that we've seen. We've got customers with over 200 apps, like where they're sort of following that microservices idea, and so they just put them all in Raygun. We kind of encourage people to split things up by app, just because it makes it way easier. You kind of you've got your separate notification settings for different apps. We try and split things up a bit, so all the production stuff is going one place, like all of our beta environments going another. So that's sort of why we've got like 80 apps, when in actual fact I think we've only got sort of 30-something services maybe, all up. So that's kind of like a question that comes up a lot, like, how do you know if Raygun's down if you're monitoring Raygun with Raygun? It's like, well, yeah, smart ass, but like we have other stuff, right? Like we're not so high on our own supply that we don't use other tools. So we've got other monitoring. So even just basic stuff like every service has to have like a health check endpoint. Essentially, we can just go, hey, just keep pinging that thing, and if something comes back that's not like success, everything is good, then like start throwing alerts at people. We've got Liberato set up as well. So same thing. If something spikes out of control, the thing we noticed with the S3 outage was that the S3 worker started queuing up really badly. So errors are coming in and it's storing them on disk, and and sort of because we can have really bursty times, like where sort of a new guy comes in and just pummels us with errors for a while. It's like, okay, well, we'll slowly upload those to S3, but I need a bit of time or whatever. So the first thing we kind of knew about that was the error channel starts going crazy with like can't contact S3, and then the Liberato kicks off with, hey, the S3 worker queue is getting really long. Someone should look at that. So there's that idea of best of breed services, right? Like we don't necessarily have those kinds of like we could probably munge Raygun into doing that to start like biffing exceptions for random things, but that's not really it's not what the tool's for, and there are other better tools for that. So so that's kind of, it's one of the things we do. Just sort of got all those lovely graphs. Everybody loves graphs, right? So just like got that up on a screen in the main dev area. So people are like, oh, don't do that. So people can sort of you sort of look at you sort of eyeball the graphs every day, and alerts are one thing, but being able to sort of go, actually, like it's not spiking, but I can see a definite like negative trend, and and where this is going, like that's that's really handy, and it's not really something that Raygun does. So it's something we use external services for. We're also starting to use PagerDuty as well, which scares me a little bit. but it's good when it's not. Like our ops guys get a really hard time at the moment. So we haven't, like our operations channel, you sort of wake up sometimes and go to work, like, oh cool, what's happened? A lot of notifications in the ops channel, and and like you say, Jeremy's been like up all night trying to keep ES from losing the plot or whatever. It's like being able to see that stuff actually is really good, but like I'm not looking forward to that starting to come through in an automated wake me up fashion. But yeah, so that's kind of, I don't know, it's a bit of a lightning talk really. But does anyone have any major questions? Like, I can pretty much answer whatever. Yeah, so that was one of the things about splitting everything into like their own apps. So I won't use names, but one of the like sort of our biggest customers essentially in terms of like error volume and number of services, because they've split each of their services up into their own apps in Raygun, they basically set up little teams who have access to like a restricted set of the apps, and those apps will only deliver notifications to one particular place. But it's so that to a certain extent you're kind of trading off like sort of God level view of like what's going on in the in the whole platform versus like nobody bothers looking at it because there's so much data. So yeah, it's kind of, I guess it's a trade-off. But like personally, we try and just split things into sort of smaller Slack channels so that there's not so much stuff. But yeah, it's one of those things that we're kind of working on. We realize the notification system, even though it is grouping up stuff, sometimes it does get really spammy, especially if you have a lot of errors which are basically the same, but the grouper has missed it. So like obviously the fix for that is don't let the grouping, like fix the grouping system. But in the meantime, we've got these ideas around how to kind of rate limit it essentially. We just go, actually it's really just not that important that you spam the crap out of the ops channel, because a lot of people have that set up as a quickly need to look sort of thing. We've got a I guess the equivalent of GitHub Enterprise, sort of self-hosted idea. It's kind of on like a what's the word? People ask for it, and then it's like talk to the sales team, and and then we sort of work with getting people set up or whatever. Because we've split everything up, like obviously it's like it's optimized for like our particular, like just throw everything on a million, S3 services kind of needs. But yeah, we've got like an internal version that we're sort of working on to try and make that whole process easier, where we can just go, here is an installable version of Raygun, or self-hosted at least. So it is doable. If your company needs something like that, just try and get in touch with our sales team. Say try. Bit of both. So we do sort of monthly or yearly billing, but we've got like a small, medium, large plan sort of idea. So the difference between those is basically like a few features once you get to medium, stuff like deployment tracking and that sort of thing, and then it's all volume based. So from the top of my head, the small plan does like 25,000 errors a month, up to I think it's 3 million a month on the large. We can do bigger than that, but yeah, that's kind of custom really. But it's volume based basically. Only if it throws errors. So one of the things that obviously like I think we only really see the ones that fail. So fingers crossed, touch wood, like we haven't been hacked yet, but when we do see people like trying to sort of like essentially script kiddie type attacks, where they just sort of drive by like, let's check for this vulnerable version of CK editor or whatever, like they start hitting particular files, like we see those things, which I guess is kind of an indication of, hey, someone is trying to do something dodgy, like probably worth taking a look, but that's more just a case of a non-targeted attacker is more likely to, to kick up errors looking for vulnerabilities that don't exist in your system. So no, but kind of, I guess is the answer there. So we've got something, we do that with JavaScript source maps. Like if people haven't put their unminified source, somewhere, their source maps somewhere public, which lots of people don't want to do. We have got the ability to push up source maps just to Raygun. It's probably not unreasonable to assume that we could do that for other code. One of the things that comes up quite a bit is like sort of other obfuscation systems. Like if people are dealing with like installable desktop software or whatever. So you can upload. So like for iPhone apps, for instance, you can push up like the iOS DSIM files, and we can sort of it's not really unminify, I guess, like what do they call it? Desimplify your iOS crash reports so that you get proper stack traces. Long term, I don't see why we couldn't do that for other systems. But yeah, at the moment, it's just pulling it from GitHub because it was super easy.